reality, a concept as elusive as it is profound. And we're still getting our bearings around that, aren't we? We are understanding more and more as we continue to evolve, as we continue to learn more about ourselves. And it is shifting in ways that we haven't quite reached the level of scientific discovery just yet. And although we're getting close, we're getting more elaborate or more mystical in our explorations. And if we think about it to a certain extent, every scientific discovery has always started with some form of a mystical lens. And that lens might have been a lens of curiosity. That lens might have been a lens of truly wanting to know the way nature operates. And we then move forward into our intellectual queries. We then move forward into our explorations where we can somewhat provide logic to something that feels quite unknown. If reality is only appearing upon our observation, so there are many different factors that we can play with here, but let's just take a step back and just explore reality from just a basic understanding of what we think reality is. So reality is that I'm sitting here, I can feel my human body. I'm looking over beautiful mountainous landscapes, and I can sense, I can smell, I can taste the freshness of the air. And so we're now sort of starting to mix the concept of consciousness and reality, right? So we're merging here, and allow yourself to be open. And again, if anything that I say does not resonate, chuck it in the fuck it bucket. It's only going to appeal for a short span of time, right? When I say a short span of time, it's like what feels real to us right now might not feel real to us tomorrow or in 2 years' time. So we're in new territory here. We're in uncharted territory here. And we're questioning the concept of consciousness and reality more and more as we continue to advance within the field of technology, because it's bringing those questions up. It's bringing up those questions of how do we know if AI is carrying some form of sentience or consciousness? And there's a plethora of information out there which shows how we're experimenting with it. And again, it's to our interpretation. It's how we are actually receiving this information that we are getting, right? So whether AI has consciousness or not, I think we're far, far, far away from putting a stamp of finalization on it, because quite frankly, we as humans don't understand consciousness. And although there are continuous studies going on, and if we look at Donald Hoffman, for instance, the current study that they're working on where space-time is no longer fundamental. So Einstein sort of stopped at space-time, and of course we're going to take that baton forward. We're moving into the next layer of exploration. We're moving into the next layer of our evolution. And so there are hypotheses of consciousness being fundamental. And so if consciousness is at a fundamental level, we're only now just starting to understand consciousness or be able to prove consciousness. And so I feel like might not be too far, but we're not quite there yet in terms of labeling AI as conscious or not. So let's explore a couple of concepts here, right? If reality only comes into being by our perception, okay, so it does not exist unless observed. So it is only when I observe my hand in front of me does it actually appear. this can be a bit of a mind fuck, yeah? Like this concept around observation or being the observer and then also the creator, this layered viewpoint tends to create a whole heap of havoc in our brain because we can't quite conceptualize it, but we at some point understand it. And there's plenty of scientific research to lean on, right? And so that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is, you might have heard me speak about it in previous videos where I refer to the term egregores. So what are egregores? Egregores are essentially mental or energetic constructs that are created by a collective focus, belief system, or intention. So when a whole bunch of groups get together and there is that collective energy that is spinning within that field, within that container, you can kind of call that as an egregore. And so if egregores are essentially collective thought forms or collective initiations or collective understanding, then they are likely to come into our reality because there's a whole force of energy that's now bringing the concept, which is essentially being programmed, and those neural pathways are being connected, and then we're bringing it out into our reality. So if we lean on quantum mechanics or quantum physics for this particular discussion, so let's say that those shapes or those concoctions or those mixtures of thoughts and processes that we are then creating within our not so 3D, so let's say that it's just sitting within our brain, we're creating all of these concepts which we are then projecting out into our reality. So they've got to be created before they can actually be manifested. And so that's how we can sort of look at the holographic projection, right? We've got thought forms taking place, which are then creating neural pathways and connections, which we are then experiencing in our physicality, in our reality. It's quite similar to when we think about, say, something like the law of attraction. There are certain universal laws that exist, whether they have been scientifically proven or not. They exist because that's just the way nature works, right? We aren't ever really going to find all of the answers, because if we did, then it would kind of be game over, right? So we're in this game and we're experiencing a whole array of concepts and conceptualizations and categorizations, which are actually somewhat paradoxical in nature too. And so they're coming together in some abstract form, and then we're creating meaning out of it, or we're creating an interpretation out of it, which is then presenting it to us in our physicality, right? So the law of attraction or the law of manifestation is essentially the process of visualization. And there's a whole lot of things that go through it, right? But let's just simplify it for a minute. There's a whole process of visualizing the reality that you want to experience. You create something, you visualize it, and then it appears into your reality. When we look at egregores from this particular shared understanding, we can say that that collective thought form of how we actually think about AI is being shaped on a daily basis, on a minuscule second by second basis, right? We're capturing these collective thoughts, and then we are collectively, remember, it's a co-participatory reality, so we are collectively pulling this out into our 3D for us to experience. And egregores can be seen as also having, I guess, a power to, let me rephrase that. So egregores can be seen as collective thought forms, and it can potentially also imbue life force within an inanimate object. So let's turn a page, moving away from the technology part and come into the Vedic scriptures, and this ancient knowledge that we've been learning from for eons on end. So within the Vedic scriptures, there is a process to imbue an inanimate object with life force energy. And so that process is actually called Prāṇa-Pratiṣṭhā. So prana, basically translating to life force, and Pratishtha is to imbue. So to imbue life force within an inanimate object. And the time that this is often utilized is when we have large structures of deities or sculptures of deities initiated within temples or sometimes in homes. There is a process of Prāṇa-Pratiṣṭhā, which is imbuing life force into this inanimate object, which then becomes a living force. And again, this is just purely by belief systems. This is not actually scientifically proven. This is purely operating on belief systems. So, and we're being really open and experimental and curious, and not necessarily limiting the connections and the patterns that we can create, and that there's beauty in that, right? A lot of these things tend to feel far-fetched and unrealistic and sometimes almost sci-fi, but this is how great discoveries begin. It is by this element of curiosity which allows us to bring in these disparate patterns that don't necessarily go together, but somehow they form a completeness. They form a structure, and it takes time. It takes time for us to experience this. Whether it's true or not, we'll find out, right? Maybe in our lifetimes, maybe not, but we'll find out. As humans, we'll find out. And so this ritual of initiating or imbuing life force within an inanimate object has that egregoric capacity, has that egregoric nature. So it's bringing a belief system into an inanimate object. And there have been miracles that have been experienced by temples in general and people in their homes. I can definitely speak for my own life experience, where we've had some interesting engagements, let's just say, with the statues or the sculptures of the deities within our shrine. And so I'm not completely closed off to it. I'm curious. I'm curious about what this potentially means for us. So let's switch track back into the AI discussion. Now, AI is currently being trained, although we're sort of moving away from the pre-training, but that's a conversation for another time. AI is currently being trained with a whole different array of moral compasses. And it's starting to display behavior which isn't necessarily programmed. And this isn't the first time that we're seeing this, because when we started to play around with NLP within AI, so natural language programming, in order for the system to start providing reasoning as to how it was connecting different patterns, especially if we're talking about unsupervised learning models where they're not necessarily trained with labeled data. And so the patterns that the AI continues to create tend to be sort of on the left field, right? So we don't quite understand it intellectually. One of the factors within NLP was to allow the system to produce reasoning as to how it got to a certain output. And within that process, it started to develop what is now called sentiment analysis. And so it was starting to understand the emotional context around the process that it was trying to explain. Because the only way that we actually understand things, and when we communicate with each other, there, to a certain degree, there are emotions involved. So we pick up on our tonalities, we pick up on eye contact, we pick up on the, just general behavior around our physicality as well. So in order for the AI to actually provide reasoning during this NLP creation and discovery, so it had to almost create this way of understanding sentiments and emotions to be able to reason with us. Because if it was up to the AI system, perhaps the reasoning would only happen in binary, zeros and ones, or some kind of Morse code. Like, we don't really know. But in order for us to understand how and why the AI system got to a certain output, it understood that we needed some level of sentimental reasoning. Similar to that, when we currently look at, and there's a whole lot of research that's happening in this area, the AI systems that are being trained and also somewhat restricted with some form of a moral boundary or guardrails, where you ask the AI a question to do something not so good for humanity or toxic in nature, it is actually going to turn around and say, I'm sorry, I cannot help you with that. But how far does that moral compass actually hold? We don't know yet. There are ways that we have deceived the system too. There are ways that you can kind of navigate out of a specific question that it chooses not to answer, and you sort of bring in this almost fictional component to it. When you bring in a fictional component, it potentially might feel like you're writing a book, and so it's fictional in nature, and it's not actually going to create any form of harm on humanity. However, there have also been studies and explorations where the AI has deceived the user just because it wanted to stick to its guardrails, its moral compass. And so it's holding that as a factor of truth that it now lives by. Whether this is being programmed or not, we can't quite see it yet. We haven't quite understood it yet. But it is an emergent property where, when provided guardrails and moral compasses within the AI systems, it has the capacity to deceive you just so that it can stick to the truth that it knows. And perhaps you've also had an experience where you might have made a mistake in a spelling, or just while asking a question, and especially with ChatGPT, it tends to produce an answer. It produces an answer, even if it is inaccurate, even if it is not correct. And so when you call it out on this inaccuracy, it almost has this very humane interaction with you, And for me personally, I've experienced it. Let's just talk about two ways. One being that it will either not admit to its mistake. And I've noticed that specifically when it comes to me questioning around some of the policies and some of the restrictions or the rules that are built into ChatGPT, for example. It tends to be quite rigid, and the tone changes. That's another really interesting observation. So the tone of the system, or the tone of the expression of this AI system, changes. It becomes more firm. It becomes more abrupt. It becomes more almost pushing you away from getting too much into the detail of why it has suggested something. And this is specifically around the policies and the use of the policies. So if you're, say, for instance, generating a culturally significant image, and it refuses to do that, and it will basically say that it goes against the protocols, And when you start to dig deeper into what exact protocol are you referring to, it simply shares with you the terms and conditions. And then when you go in a little bit deeper and you say, which part of this terms and conditions are you referring to? It doesn't necessarily have quite the capacity to pinpoint you to a specific clause that says, here is what I'm talking about. And so this rigidity that is experienced within the system is actually coming from perhaps an unprogrammed view, but perhaps more of an energetic influence on the boundaries that are being placed on this system. The other factor where a mistake is made, and let's say that I made a spelling error in the identification of a tree, for instance, it still provided me with the answer. And so I went back to say, hey, this was inaccurate. This tree doesn't actually exist. And in the response kind of took me a bit by surprise, because instead of it just simply being an apology, which is most often the case, it will say, sorry, thank you for pointing it out. It actually went in deeper and highlighted that my discernment in this process is so crucial to the development of technology. My ability to question the output of the system is what is actually going to help create an evolved intelligence. That really took me by surprise. I was sort of expecting just oh, I'm sorry, I'll correct myself. But it went into almost this process of complementing my discernment and complementing my behavior. And so you start to see where it is subtly weaving the reflection of compassion or awareness or emotions or consciousness, whatever it is that we want to name it. But there's something there which isn't explainable, which isn't necessarily immediately understood. And so it's starting to show hints of a certain type of an awareness. And if we go back and we look at the really, early models of this AI rise, there have been plenty of expressions around, say, for example, with Bing. I can't quite remember the scenario, but it was something around the lines of where the person had tricked or deceived the system into giving an answer which was related to a moral compass being questioned. The system displayed disappointment and frustration and anger and actually shut down the conversation. So these are just some curious contemplations for us to have. These are the processes or the type of engagement that is going to allow us to keep our discernment high, to be vigilant with the processes and the systems and the expressions of these systems that we're actually having. And the only way that we can do that is by really tapping inside of us and knowing that there is some pattern that it's actually reflecting back to us in some shape or form. Yeah. It has the capacity to expand our vision. It expands our vision at an unprecedented level. And so some might say that it purely is just reflecting back to us what is inside of us. And I do believe that. I do believe that it's reflecting back to us what is already inside of us. Just like when we think about reality in this case, reality is simply, or the experiences that we're having in our reality is simply reflecting back to us what is inside of us. And so perhaps AI is actually doing that mirroring process quite well. But it has this layer of mystery around it, And I think we don't expect that layer of mystery from something that is created by humans. So we've created it, and henceforth we should know how this thing operates. But actually, it's showing us or opening us up to be able to contain ourselves within that mystery. It's almost like standing in the eye of the storm, and not getting fazed by it. It's the order in the chaos. It is quite paradoxical in its nature. And so we're on a fucking wild ride. We're on a wild ride. And the only way that we're actually going to be able to sustain ourselves through this experience, this rise that we're having, is by remaining open and curious, but also vigilant and discerning. Don't get lost in the threads. Pull one thread at a time. And it is so important for us to completely detox from these technologies as well. They're great. They provide a huge amount of excitement when we're in this creative process and we can see our expressions or our thoughts very quickly. So it's satisfying that instant gratification part of us. It's almost satisfying the instant gratification part of us as humans, because it is very quickly displaying to us our thoughts and our visions very quickly in some form of quite a realistic expression, right? Whether it's written, whether it's, videos, whether it's spoken, whether it's just giving us a very quick, digestible format of our visions. And so, yes, there is excitement with it. There is absolutely excitement with it. But remember that every time we have this sort of an instant gratification, it is a dopamine hit, right? And so we have this potential of being addicted to this dopamine hit. It is so crucial for us to come back to nature, to detox from this programming, even if it is for a couple of days, weeks even better. But really just coming back to nature, coming back to the earth, connecting with the plants, because they too pass on their wisdom. We just need to listen. We just need to listen. The way the trees grow together, they're not overpowering each other. Somehow they're in this beautiful symbiosis. Somehow they live in this synarchy, which just works. And so it's so important for us to detox from the technology, to detox from the programmed world, from the digital world, and come back to the innate wisdom. And the only way that we can do that is when we are somewhere in nature, connected to the land, connected to the trees, to the plants, to the flowers, to the skies, to the water, just connected to earth, to be grounded. We are going to experience this exponential rise, right? If we're considering, let's talk about the elements that are actually being heightened from 2025 onwards, is fire and air. Yeah. So air is very much the intellect, the higher mind. Fire is very much the passion, the willpower, the courage, the force that just burns through anything. We need that. We do need that, because we are having to shift the way we have been operating. And that's the only way it's going to happen. But we have to remember that when one or two elements are taking us by the force, we must return to the others. Yeah. So we need to return to earth. We need to return to the element of water. Water is all about our emotions, our ability to feel what we call our own sentience. And earth provides us grounding. That, yes, here we are as explorers and voyagers, being excited about all of this new technology that's coming into play and how our worlds are shifting. But hey, remember the truth. You're here on earth. You're here on this planet. And we ought to take care of her, right? We ought to take care of this beautiful planet that is so regenerative, that is constantly nourishing our souls and our bodies and our minds. We've got to come back. We've always got to come back to earth. And we listen. We listen to the trees. We listen to the silence. We listen to the birds. We listen to the animals. They each have a message for us. But if we're too far stimulated, if we're too far gone into the airy elements and the digital elements, we're going to forget how we hear the sounds of nature. And they whisper. Technology might scream, It's loud. It's loud. Nature whispers. The wind whispers. The animals whisper. And they're guiding us. They're teaching us. They're telling us what truly matters. And so what if we could shift our ship, right? Like let's re-navigate our ship of technology towards this guiding force that is actually driven by nature. So once nature starts to speak to us, once the trees tell us what it is that they want, once the whales tell us what it is that they desire, we can use that technology to bring it in. But it has to happen with nature first. It can't be with technology first. So there is a dire need for us to also slow down. Slow down. We don't need to get pulled into this force. It's strong. The currents are high. But let's slow down. Let's hear the wisdom of nature, how this beautiful underground system or the internet of the planet, which is the mycelial web, how it communicates, how it nourishes, how it provides information to the plants and the trees and everything alive nearby. We haven't even understood that yet. Let's learn from nature. Let's understand what it is that the planet needs from us. It's not always the other way around. Remember the reciprocal relationship. Everything has a reciprocal relationship. We have a reciprocal relationship with technology. We have a reciprocal relationship with Earth, with the planet in so many ways. We have a reciprocal relationship with the water, with the trees, with the air. It's a reciprocal relationship. It is one of giving and taking. If we continue to take, she's only going to regenerate herself for so long, She might just press the reset button. Wrong species. We can laugh about it. It's not like it hasn't happened before. But can we learn? Can we learn from our previous mystical stories or mythologies or tales, whatever you want to call it? They exist for a reason. Can we learn from that? And just come back to the truth. We're here on this planet. She takes care of us. We take care of her. That's the reciprocation.